We are all free individuals. That is what we're taught. We have the freedom to choose who we love. We have the freedom to worship as we choose. We have the freedom to pursue the profession of our liking. We have many choices available to us, and we should not take those freedoms for granted. I think sometimes about the limits that are placed on those freedoms. Certainly there should be some limits, but where should the line be drawn? Nowhere is the line more questionable, at least to me, than the one that limits our economic freedom. I'd like to discuss the role of privacy on our economic freedoms. Without privacy, there is no economic freedom, and I believe that the options for privacy are disappearing very quickly in our modern economic age. When we work hard to earn the money to support ourselves, but not all of that labor is ours to keep. If you are employed, then a certain percentage of your income is withheld automatically and immediately sent to Washington. If you are self-employed, then you are required to send a check quarterly. Much of that money is spent on things that benefit us and society. Much of it is squandered. Quite a bit of it goes to the Social Security Trust, which government tells us they are saving for our future, when in reality the money is going into the general fund to be spent on other things. Much of our taxes go to purposes that many of us find morally reprehensible. Do we have a choice about how much money is spent and where it goes? To a very small extent we do, but the influence is so small as to be virtually meaningless. These taxes are portrayed by the government as a necessary evil. Many agree, many disagree. But for those who disagree, how much of a voice do they actually get on an individual level? Without enough money to influence the politicians, or a great majority of voters on their side, their voice is ineffectual at best and non-existent at worst. But how taxes get used is a very subjective and contentious area. So let's set aside the income tax issue and focus on our freedom to use what's left over as we see fit. Once our income tax has been paid and our civic obligation honored, we should be fully free to use the remainder as we see fit, right? Most hardworking people are able to keep between 60 and 80% of what they earn. Some of the money is used for current spending. We have to buy food, clothing, shelter, transportation, and fuel. But when you buy food, it is taxed. When you buy clothing, it is taxed. When you buy a car, you pay sales tax and then registration fees, continuously. When you buy fuel, it is taxed heavily. When you buy a house, even after you pay the transfer and stamp taxes, and even if the house is not mortgaged, you don't own it. Twice a year you will be taxed by the county and state based upon the assessed value of the house. If you fail to pay the taxes, a lien will be placed on the property, and eventually you will be evicted and the property sold to pay what the state or county state that you owe. Some would argue that these taxes are necessary. The taxes on gasoline pay to maintain the roads, at least in theory. Real estate taxes go to support the school districts and county operations. Yes, the reasons given for these taxes are sound, though I'd argue that the actual way that the money is spent is very wasteful, and much like income taxes, we have very little individual influence over that spending. If you don't like the way that the roads in your area are maintained, you can't choose not to pay the gasoline tax. If you think that real estate taxes are too high because there are too many school district administrative bureaucrats that are paid far too generously, you can't stop paying real estate taxes, at least not for long without severe consequences. But even if you agree and support all of this taxation, let's take a look at what's left of the fruits of your labor and see how it is treated. Once you have paid all of your living expenses, assuming that you live below your means and still have some money left over, you have to decide how to save the surplus to use in the future. If you decide to put your money in a federally sanctioned IRA or 401k plan, then you will not have access to the money without penalty until you are age 59 and a half. And with the 401k, you don't even have the ability to take an early withdrawal without leaving your employer first. You won't have full flexibility with the assets in the account because you will be limited by the slate of options offered by the plan administrator. When you retire, you can start taking distributions, but you'll be subject to whatever prevailing tax rate is at the time. And what if later the government decides to means test Social Security and Medicare payments? Well, guess what? Your 401k and IRA balances are fully known and discoverable. That means that anyone with the legal authority will know you have it and how much is in it. If the government decides that you've saved too much and as a result you're entitled to less Social Security, how will you argue your case? In our current environment, where solvency is becoming a bigger and bigger threat and government actions are growing increasingly desperate, who knows how far government actions may go to stay afloat in the future. The statements that you receive from your 401k or IRA will show that you own X shares of XYZ Corporation or Y shares of a bond fund. Are those shares really yours? No. The shares will be registered in the name of the financial company who administers the account, and your statements will serve as a reflection that you have a credit with the company for those shares. Does this sound like economic freedom to you? I hope not. So what if you opt to buy stocks and bonds without using a retirement savings vehicle? Well, you can place your money with a broker who will give you a credit for the shares that the broker will hold on their books. Each year, the broker will report all dividends, interest, capital gains to the IRS so that taxes can be collected. Never mind that most of your capital gains are a result of price inflation resulting from currency debasement. You still owe taxes on them. Be assured, the government will have full knowledge of all of your brokerage accounts. And guess what? If you're delinquent on any tax payments, the government can put a freeze on your accounts. You could always choose to put your money in a nice safe bank account. The trouble, though, is that the Federal Reserve gets a big say in how much interest you'll be receiving on this balance. If inflation is running at 6%, but the Federal Reserve is holding short-term rates at 0.1%, you'll be losing more than 5% in purchasing power every year. To add insult to injury, you'll be paying taxes on the 0.1%, which is also reported to the IRS at the end of every year. As was the case with brokerage accounts, your bank account can be frozen as well if you owe taxes and don't pay them. So, with any of these choices that are generally encouraged by the government and the financial system, you have no privacy. Everything is digitally tracked and reported. This is done by design. Why? Simple. We have a government that wants to have influence and control over every economic choice that you make. They get to decide how much you pay in taxes. If you disagree and disobey, they still have a way of extracting what they think you should be paying. As long as your assets are held by a custodian and there is a record of them, you don't have control. Let me say that again. As long as your assets are held by a custodian and there is a record, you don't have control. Whether the bulk of your savings is in a brokerage account, a bank, or simply a paid-off house, there is a record of the value of everything that you own and a way to take it from you, whether you believe it is just or not. This is a big threat that faces everyone. If you are faced with a system that you believe is completely out of control, you have very few options open to you that do not put your economic well-being at risk. Suppose, though, that you have no issues at all with the system. You've paid your taxes, you're current, you believe that everything the government is doing is just, and you're more than happy to pay what they say you owe. Do you have economic freedom then? What if someone trips and falls on your property, and claims that they can no longer work as a result. What if that person takes you to court? What is the first thing the opposing lawyer will do? Well, he will go to the public records to find out how much insurance you're carrying and how much you own in liquid assets. If your liquid assets are large, then the damages sought will be much larger than what your insurance will cover. If a decision is made against you and the damages are awarded, then the wealth will be taken from you. Rightly or wrongly, it is how our system is set up. They will take what they are able to see. When all that you own is part of the public record, then all that you own is at risk. Without privacy, there is no economic freedom. Our modern economic system that keeps track of everything using digits on a computer has all but eliminated privacy. All that you own is part of this system, represents a threat of loss should you decide to choose to exercise your freedoms against the government's will. All that you own that is part of this system makes you a target for an envy-based, frivolous lawsuit that may be filed against you. So long as your assets are visible and out of your personal control, your options to exercise economic freedom are extremely limited. But there is one place that is still an option to store your surplus wealth, where you will have privacy. Sure, there will still be threat of a burglary, but in the current environment, it seems that the threat of private theft is dwarfed by the threat of an open theft in public. I see this as a major advantage of this asset above all others. There will be likely a time coming soon, maybe this decade, where having assets that are visible to the public will be a major liability. The only thing you truly own is what you can hold and what you can hide. Everything else can be taken from you with the full endorsement of others who will use speeches peppered with envious language to justify the theft. I'd urge you all to consider carefully what I've just said.